Welcome to Rooftop Conversations. So when I first entered law school, being the first in my family to go to law school was totally intimidating. And of course, like clearly nothing about me screams like law student, lawyer, nothing. The personality, to the look, the dress, and I don't know. But I was really fortunate enough to find a group of young women who were at this point in their final year of law school to help guide me and provide me with a path of not only what it's like to be active and vocal and to be brave about speaking up for what you believe for, especially in times when social justice is needed, but the importance of being yourself and to represent yourself in the legal field. And today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing one of those young women today, Jessica Giesen, or Jess Giesen. And I'm so honestly like in awe. It's like kind of like interviewing one of your heroes. And yeah, it's it's really awesome that like now I'm getting to interview Jess and like doing all this. So Jessica, please like introduce yourself, who you are, just a 3 to 5 sentence like bio about yourself, because of course I'm not going to do your greatness justice.
Thank you, May. I said this to you before. You're too kind. You give me way too much credit, but thank you so much for having me. This is exciting. I'm going to take my glasses off. I'm fogging them up. It's a little distracting. Yeah, my name's Jessica Giesen, as you said. I graduated from New York Law School in 2017. I'm living down here in Florida with my husband. We're basically just down here for work. It's a good professional experience, but we don't plan to stay here forever. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else. Do you want me to go through my whole history?
I would
Whatever else
just
you
say
want me
like
to talk
probably
about.
what you do like right now, like what kind of law you practice, like just really brief. Like you don't have to state your firm.
Okay. So right now I practice insurance defense. I pretty much do third party defense and general liability. I and I've only been doing this for about 6 months, so it's kind of like a whole new area for me. Before that, I was at the Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office, so I started off my career with pretty much all criminal law, and then before that, I was a law clerk for Judge Fully Love Jr. in Essex County, New Jersey. So we did criminal there, and then a little bit of family law. But I really had to just totally like start over back in January when I got this new job. So it's interesting. It was a pay raise, which was necessary, but it's very interesting. I'm still learning a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, it's like the practice of law, not the study of law, because it's always changing. You're always learning something new.
Exactly.
Even me, like I'm like a
Exactly.
new lawyer and I'm just starting out in my career and I'm just like still trying to find my way. And it is, it is like interesting. It's a journey. I would definitely say that. It does not end with just passing the bar. There is more to go.
That's like just the beginning.
It
Fortunately
really
or
is.
unfortunately, whichever way you want to look at it.
It really is. I'm like, but anyway, like, so you had a very interesting career. Like, you went to art school and undergrad in San Francisco, which,
Yeah.
okay, San Francisco's an awesome city. I have family that lives there, so
Oh,
super cool that
good.
you're from there. Yeah. And you went to art school, but then decided to pursue a law career. So I would love to know from your own words, like, what was your motivation for pursuing a law degree, especially coming from, because when you like I'm not saying like, oh, you can't do an art career and then jump to law school, but it's just like a very different path from like what I've seen for a lot of people where it's usually they're like a political science major or like a social science major that goes into law school. But to do an art major and go into law school, it's just very unique. So I would love to hear like what your motivation for shifting career paths was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I get that question a lot because it is kind of rare to have somebody who has a fine arts degree for their undergrad and then went to law school, especially immediately after college, like I did. I didn't take any time off. So I initially, well, I'll back it up because it's kind of a long story, so I'll make it short. But I played soccer my whole life. I played college soccer. I first started off playing Division 1 at University of California, Riverside down in Southern California. Then I transferred to Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and they actually had a NCAA Division 2 women's soccer team and other sports. So I played soccer there, and I majored in advertising. And then my niche within advertising was creative strategy. So it was a lot of like focus groups and psychology and kind of anthropological data for the advertising firms that you would theoretically go work for. But while I was playing there, I started to see and experience and realize firsthand how student athletes get treated by colleges and by the NCAA. I mean, it's really difficult. Anyone who's a student athlete knows it's really, really difficult to maintain your grades and maintain your athletic performance on a constant basis. Um, I think a lot more for like basketball players, football players at these like really huge Division I schools, they would get um, kind of wrapped up in the sports side of everything, and then their school would fall behind, and they wouldn't really get any funding to even get themselves food or have proper housing, or anytime they get super injured and maybe it would end their career, they wouldn't have any health care afterwards. So there were a lot of issues that really seemed important to me, and I thought to myself, you know what? Why don't I go into sports law? This seems like it's something that I'm really interested in. And I know everything with my art degree would still help me. I still learned a lot about how to understand people, how to understand behaviors. I love art too. I still consider myself an artist. So I kind of got to like finger paint. It was a lot harder than that, but I think to myself, I got to finger paint for like 4 years. And then go to law school. So I got to have a really good time in undergrad, and I transitioned into law thinking I wanted to go into sports law. So when I first started at New York Law School, I immediately got involved in the Sports Law Society. I actually designed the Sports Law Society's logo. So I got to like morph my art into my new passion of law. And what I started to understand was that I wanted to help underprivileged people. I wanted to help people who didn't have all the resources that maybe somebody who comes from my background or an even more comfortable background would have. So a lot of kids would be getting drafted right out of high school and not go to college, or their parents wouldn't really necessarily know how to make sure they weren't getting taken advantage of or read contracts. So I wanted to help people who needed help. I came to realize that sports law is more about bigger things, bigger companies, people with a lot more money. So I understood that I wouldn't actually be able to do what I wanted to do, which was helping people, for a very long time. I would probably have to wait until I completely established myself and could start my own nonprofit and fund it myself. So in my 1 year, I took another step back and thought, okay, well, what's my point here? I want to help people. How can I help people? Public interest. So that's kind of how my path got shifted in public interest. But it's a long path to how I got to where I've gotten, but it all kind of still works together, if you know what I mean.
No, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing that story. I definitely agree. I think like when it comes to young, it's like, 18-year-old kids that are still being like, you don't really know much about the world. You're still kind of like, you're being like, it's like in a way, like you're pushed into this glamorized world of like, oh, being a professional
Yes,
basketball player or a professional soccer player, or but you don't really know like the contracts behind it. And of course, like a lot of these folks at these big universities, they have the legal representation backing them up. They have the resources to kind of like make sure that they're at an advantage when it comes to like a lot of these young players. And it's really admirable that like
right.
right from the get go, and like of course, because I met you as like this super caring, this super social justice for a person, and it's really interesting to see like how your background as a student athlete shaped that. Well, of course, like one of the things that shaped your motivation for wanting to help people, and that's really admirable. And of course, like once again, law school takes you like to three different paths. Like it's always like it's just like never linear. And I feel like that's what people you go into like you're
Never.
like you go in like wanting to do one thing, you realize it's not that great, and then you always shift like based on your experiences and based on like what you realize and the hard truths that you find in the industry, which kind of like sucks, but it's
Yeah,
definitely a growing process. Because I know that's happened
yeah,
to me, like with like my own law school journey, even like up until recently, like post grad, where like I came in like okay, international human rights. Then I was like, the UN doesn't do anything. Let me just focus on politics and like legislation and government. And then like
right.
I was really like so set on that until I started working in the nonprofit world and doing like criminal justice work. And I'm like, oh my God, this is probably where I want to be. I took on a fellowship that was like based on government, like a like fellowship based on government and like bureaucracy, and I saw kind of like the dark side of it. I was like, nope, that's not what I want to do. I ruled out government completely now as of right now. Like I'm like, nope,
Wow.
no more. Yeah.
But
So I'm
you know
like,
what? Like, that's okay. That's what I tell people.
yeah,
I think I probably told this to you. I told it to anybody when I was in my third year who was just coming
yeah,
in, and I continue to tell law students, like, it
yeah,
is okay to change your mind. We all go in with this expectation of what it's going to be. We go in with this plan, and some people stick to it. My husband has wanted to be a public defender since he was 8 years old, watching OJ's trial, like watching the chase on TV in his Bronco, and he's a public defender and he loves it. His path has never wavered. My brother is very similar with his career in film. He's known since he was this big what he wants to do, but not everybody's like that. And it's okay to just follow your gut. And I think you're better off if you follow your gut and you don't force yourself to stay in one area. So I admire you for just listening to yourself and listening to what you like and you don't like and following that. I'm still doing that. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up, if I'm being honest.
no, same. I'm like, I always do that. Like, oh, I want to be this person when I grow up, or I want to do this when I grow up. Because even though at 26, I still don't feel like a complete adult. Like I'm like
I
probably
get
the
it.
furthest thing from an adult. Like I'm like, I don't know. Like,
I get it.
like
And you do these like adult things. Like I'm married. We just
yeah,
bought a house, but like I'm still like, what am I gonna do when I grow up? And that's okay. Like you can move on with your
yeah,
life and you're ready for
definitely.
certain things and not others. So anyway,
One
I'm
hundred
proud of you
percent.
for just following
Oh,
your gut and not forcing yourself into something that you thought you wanted to do in the beginning, you know?
yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, like early in June, I decided to quit my fellowship early, and right now I'm in between jobs, but of course taking on different activities like working on activism, especially in light of like the movement going on, the uprisings. This is a
Right.
great time for me to be involved and of course use my privilege as a lawyer, not even a law student, a lawyer to
Yeah, I gotta get
give
used to that
back.
now.
I'm like, oh, when I see my name like printed, like, and I don't know if it's like imposter syndrome or whatnot, but when I see my name printed out, like, I'm not gonna state my full name here, but like XXXESQ, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look right. I'm like, the ESQ doesn't look right on my name. Like, it's just like, and I don't know if it is
You like
imposter
can't believe
syndrome.
it.
Yeah, I'm like,
I mean, it could be, but it's also it does take some time to get used to, especially when you're younger and becoming an attorney. I mean, and it depends like the area of law you're going into. Like you're in this industry with mostly older white males, and here you are, a millennial woman of color, and you're like, I'm an attorney, and people almost will treat you differently because you're just became an attorney. I have imposter syndrome on a regular basis, especially moving into civil law versus criminal. Excuse me. So I mean, it's you're not alone when sometimes it takes you a second to be like, "Whoa, ESQ," but you'll get used to it, and then you'll own it. But for me, it's been 3 years, and it's still I'm like, oh, sometimes you'll get used to it. You earned it.
yeah,
That's the
thank
point.
you. I've been in ESQ for I think about 4 months, and it still hasn't hit me yet. I'm like, oh, this doesn't look right. I don't think like people like me should not be in ESQ. Like, really, this girl, like, do they really just take anyone off the street and become a lawyer these days? But
New
of
days,
course,
new times.
yeah, new times, and of course, like you're right. I think like when it comes to like you're being a millennial, you're young, you're a woman of color, it's time for us to like own it, right? It's not a boys club anymore. This is like time for
Right.
new ideas, time for like a new wave of lawyers and a new way of thinking when it comes to law. And even with talks about like establishing diploma privilege and taking the bar and like thinking of new ways to become more inclusive and open that gate, like the gate and the pipeline for other young talent to come in and young passionate folks to come in, is so important. And of course, like a lot of the movement of this like DP thing is from like young millennial folks of color that are pushing this fight. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see like how this is coming into play and coming into a juncture that like we do belong here. And thank you for that affirmation. I really appreciate it. So I'd love
Yeah.
to ask like another question. So you touched on it a little bit, like it is like you're a young millennial within like a boys club, a white man's club, and I would just love to know like your experiences in law school because you did do a lot. You really did like put yourself out there, and you made yourself a figure. At least I think so. Like you were definitely one of the people that was like a trailblazer on campus and really kind of showed yourself, and like you like just you didn't care what anyone had to say. It was just kind of like I'm here. I have stuff to do. I have things I want to change, and like we're gonna listen. And like that's like one of the biggest things I admired about you. So like I would love to know, like, so you started a club in law school, so dedicated to women, and it's called. And tell me if I'm getting the name wrong, because I know it by acronym. So this is like the flaw of like how our school does it. They call every club by acronym, and you forget
So
the
you never
name.
actually know. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, oh, so okay, you started a club, and is it the Legal Association of Women?
Yes. For
Okay, so
women.
you started for women. See, oh my God, the Legal Association for
Not
Women,
a huge
or
deal.
known as Law. And I would love to know, like, what was your motivation behind starting that club, and why are groups like these so important for students, especially those students who are underrepresented in law school?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I kind of revived the club with my dear friend Samantha Dunax, who graduated with me. It was kind of her idea to begin with, actually, and she approached me and said, "Hey, there used to be this association at our school back in the '80s called Legal Association for Women, and it kind of just died out. Do you want to revive this with me? Do you want to be co-presidents with me?" She was also the president of BALSA, the Black Law Student Association at the time. So she was like, "I'm going to totally like spread myself so thin here. Like, I need help." And I was like, "Oh my God, absolutely. This is such a great idea." So thankfully we did this together, because I was also on the executive board of a couple of different other clubs. And this is just how we are. Neither of us had the time to give 100% of ourselves to it, but we were there to help each other. So we essentially revived it, and we had an executive board of incredible 3Ls and incredible friends of ours that were just so amazing and so helpful in restarting this. We had Dora Rodriguez. She went by Dory in law school. We had Rosie Belliard. Now she's an immigration attorney. I'm still close with her. We had Shelby Hoffman. We had Kelly. We had, and people are going to kill me if I'm forgetting anybody. There were a lot of people that were really helpful, and we made a position for each person to be able to contribute. We had, your classic secretary, treasurer, but we also had like mental health chair. We had a social outreach chair. And we just wanted a place for women in the school to come to be able to feel safe and to be able to feel supported. A huge part of our platform too was that the club was not just for women. We wanted men to be excited about joining, and we wanted allies to be excited about joining. And it wasn't just for women that were biologically born as women. It was for anybody that identified as a woman, that considered themselves a feminist, that supported equality. It was just a safe space for everybody. And we put on the first symposium that I think it had ever had in the spring of, I think, 2017 when we graduated, and that was really, really cool. We had a panel. We had multiple panels of speakers. We had professors. We had other people come in. We had Professor Shurkow as one of our honorary male speakers on the work-life balance panel, because his wife's an attorney too. It was just really cool. We did a few events. I remember you getting involved as well. You were a member of ours. You just stood out to me from the very beginning. You were ready to take the school by by charge. And then at the end of our 3L year, when we were getting ready to move on, we were so fortunate to find really passionate rising 2Ls and some of them were rising 3Ls, I think, who wanted to take over and wanted to essentially carry on our baby. And it was really hard to let it go because we had done so much to put life into it. It was really hard to let it go. So we really thoughtfully chose the new leaders. And I'm very proud of how it's continued on. And even today, Sam and I keep an eye on it, and not in a controlling way because it's not ours anymore, but we're just proud of how far it's come and the place that it has at the school. But there was a need for it. One of the board members at the school at one of our kind of meet and greets actually said to me and saying, "Oh, well, why isn't there a club for boys? Why do we need to start this?" And I shit you not. And we went, the entire legal profession is a club for boys, so we're going to take this one. But teaching moment. We wanted to have a lot of teaching moments and not kind of brush people off, but educate people on why it was important to have a place for women to be supported. So that's kind of how that got started.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's so important to have spaces like these, like the fact that the whole entire legal profession is a guys club, and like I know like our law school definitely had. Well, I don't know how it was for your time there, but I know for my time there, from like 2016 to 2019, it was oh two. Yeah, so like I don't know how it was for like our law school is definitely like a little different, especially talking to other peers in other law schools. I don't know exactly how it was for your year, but I know for mine, being there from like fall of 2016 to spring of 2019, there was actually more women, or at least like women identifying students than they were male. But like even then, like just like the entire legal profession itself is a guys club, and like I think like law did provide that safe space. I know like all the people that you mentioned, you, Sam Dunak, Shelby Hoffman, Doris Shell Rodriguez, those were all women who eventually became my mentors as well, and also people that I looked up to. So like like you were like naming everyone, I was like, oh, these are all my heroes. But yeah, like definitely these are like to kind of provide that safe space where it's like, okay, not only like where was it like just women, but also women of color who were outspoken, who like were driven, who were like ready to make changes. And I know law definitely came at the forefront of everything. So when I went into law school, I came into law school at the most interesting time that anyone could be a new law student. I came into law school the fall 2016 when the current president, I do not claim him as my president,
I
but
don't say
the
his name
current,
either.
I don't say his name, he is, no one cares about him, but the
Nope.
current president, number 45, was elected as president of the United States. And, for me, it was very difficult because this was someone who made disparaging remarks on different ethnic groups, women, uh, promoted like sexual assault and abuse. It was very disheartening to see, like I'm also not defending Clinton as well because I know she does have her own problems, but it was like this weird sense of hope where, oh my God, we could have the first, like we just came from having the first African American president. There could be a first woman president. And for me, being someone who always wants to be in politics, that was kind of inspirational. Like, oh, she might not look like me, but she's similar, and maybe like I have a shot. And when this person came into won the election, I was like, wait, so you have someone that said X, Y, and Z about all these people, and he still won, which obviously speaks to, the way that our country is and whatever. But
Right.
I, it was just interesting because like the day after, I was like hurt, like I was disheartened, and I had just come from an undergrad that was very politically active. I came from a very, very politically charged school. Everyone had like like Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, like stickers everywhere. People talked about politics. People organized. People like went to the park and protested. People talked about like Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin, and like people were radically charged that where I went to an undergrad. But when I went to law school, I expected to walk in that day with people outraged. And I walked into class and no one said a word. And I was like, wait, hold on. Something's a little off. Like, isn't like law school supposed to be like this radically charged place where everyone's supposed to be talking about it? And I think what hurt me more was like I saw folks like actively supporting Trump in my
Yeah.
class, like in my section, which
Yeah.
like made it like a smack in my face because I mean, I'm blessed enough to have been in a bubble my whole life. Like I grew up in New York City, went to school in New York City. I never saw that, but coming to law school, that was the first time I felt like actually unsafe. I was like, oh my God, there's people out there like that actually wanted him to win and they're sitting right next to me in class. It's not just some hypothetical figure. So
Right.
the first group
Gloating
that really
almost.
yeah, and like I was just like appalled. I was like, I've never seen this in my life. And granted, that's me being very oblivious to everything because I'm in this bubble. But it was just disheartening to see like no one else was saying anything. But it was like law actually was the first group, at least the first group I saw, that actually made a statement, that actually took charge. I know that you and your co-president, Samantha Dunop, came out with this statement on Facebook and on social media. You explicitly were the one saying like this is wrong and we're here to help. And I know that, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of seemed like your group, or maybe some others were in charge of this, but there was an event hosted with the dean of the administration of school to talk about basically the effects and the impacts of what happened at the
Right.
election. So,
Right.
I know like you and your co-president were very active. You guys spoke. You guys were the only ones that, like, you all were like the only ones that were explicit about this, and that's something I really respected. Um, and like you ensured that all the students had a safe space, right, including myself, including other people that came in. So I would love to know, like, during that time, like fall 2016, what was that experience like for you as like a law student who's about to enter the legal field, as someone who's running a club aimed for women and feminism, and also like what was the experience like, and if you received any backlash on campus?
Yeah, well, I'm really happy, May, that like you said that you felt like there was a safe space. That was the point of what Sam and I were doing, and the rest of the executive board. So I'm really glad that that's actually, at least for you, which to me, if you help one person, that's 20. But I'm really glad that that was how you actually felt. And I had a similar experience to you because I mean, I grew up in Berkeley, California. With the exception of my short time down in Southern California, I went to college in San Francisco. I came from a very liberal bubble, around very liberal, open-minded people in my life, and my eyes were opened, like wide opened, by this election in 2016, and it was very, very, very interesting being in law school at the same time. I also, as interesting and kind of like demoralizing the outcome of that election was, I felt very empowered that I was actually in law school, earning my degree, gaining the skills to be able to hopefully make change. But I remember that the next morning, I mean, I stayed up all night. I stayed up till like 1 or 2 in the morning, whatever time the results finally came in. And I could not believe it. I thought I was in a dream. And I remember on the subway the next morning, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, the vibe in the city, and it was raining that day. Like, it was gloomy. The vibe in the city was like bizarre to me, quiet, kind of like solemn. But then you had this little bubble of people, that were excited about the outcome. And Sam was equally as distraught. We talked at length about how he felt. We went straight to Dean Crowell and Sally Harding and the rest of the administration, and we're like, what can we do? What can we do here? I think even before we went to them, we just took it upon ourselves to record that video that you're talking about, where we wanted to say something. We wanted to address people because we knew how we were feeling. So we're like, God, other people must be feeling just as horrible. Other people who were not happy about the result must be feeling just as horrible. So we did it on behalf of law and BALSA, because Sam was also the president of BALSA. And it was totally a shock to us how much traction the video got. Other law schools associations were sharing it on Facebook, and it kind of like blew up, and we were just like, what? That's not what we thought would happen at all. We just were hoping maybe it would help 1 or 2 people who saw it. And it was cathartic for us. Now it was tough because you don't want to alienate people who need to have an education on certain things. You don't want to shut them off even more to the point where you can't kind of bring them to the light and show them, no, this is problematic because XYZ. So, I mean, we had to really kind of tread the line with being real and honest, but also not alienating people who were maybe members of our organization who supported Trump. I don't know that we really had any, but I think we might have had one ish. And that kind of became tension at the school. You remember too, there was a group of students who were very happy that Trump won, and they were not so happy with what Sam and I said in our video, even though we felt that it was appropriate and it was very carefully curated. It was it was hard because we needed to share how we felt about kind of how terrible that day was and how scared we were of what the future was going to look like. But we did want to pinpoint the amazing things that happened. There were so many women elected to positions of power that year that we were like, we cannot forget this. So we took it as an opportunity to highlight the positives that came from it as well. But yeah, we met with Dean Crow, we met with Sally, we met with, I think Professor Burkhalter was in our meeting too. And we basically sat there the morning after and said, what are we going to do? Dean Crow was hurt. I mean, he made that very clear too. Sally was hurt. Everybody was hurting. So we all came up with this idea to kind of have an event, a safe space, a forum for people to come and speak about how they're feeling, their fears, their joys, whatever was going on. So we had, I think, a couple of those that happened, and everyone had an opportunity to get up and share. And, you know, at those events, there were also students who were in support of Trump that came, as they were allowed to and as their right. You know, we wanted to hear how everybody was feeling. But the more everybody shared about how they felt, the more contentious it kind of got. So Sam and I, as things moved forward, really had to try to be leaders in the sense that we had to still be open and welcoming to people with different points of view. As offensive as they may have been to us personally, you kind of have to put certain things aside as a leader. So that was a learning experience for me. I'm sure it was for Sam too. But yeah, that was empowering to have the space and the support from the school to be able to have those forums. I mean, you need that as students. You need to be able to process what's going on, and you need to feel like a sort of family. A lot of people were far from the families. My family was across the country. I mean, my brother is in New York, but other than my brother, everyone else that we know is far away. So I know that was the same for a lot of other students. But yeah, I don't know if I answered all your questions. I kind of started rambling.
No, you definitely touched on like the main points. Yeah. But like
What else
I
did you
know,
ask
like
me? I feel like I did not answer.
no, I think you covered everything. It was like your
Okay.
experience. What was your experience like? Did you receive backlash? How did you overcome it? Which you touched on, because you
Okay.
basically said, like, you know, as a leader, it's a learning experience too, and that's something I'm personally still working with, right? Because I'm someone where it's like, oh my God, you're conservative. I don't want to speak to you. I'm done. We're not even gonna have a discussion anymore. But it's like,
Yeah.
okay, May, like think about it. These folks may come from a different understanding that you have. You know, they may have different experiences. They may have different family members, different people, like different friends around them that you
Right.
may not have had. So like even going forward with like, you know, fast forward to 2020 with like, you know, the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade. You know, I don't even want to list. There's so many names that I'm just like,
Yeah.
I can't even do it justice. And it's like disheartening. But like having even these conversations at home, having these conversations with people in the community, you know, it's like, okay, instead of fighting back and like, no, I'm done with you, hold them accountable and let's talk through everything, right? Let's like, why do you feel this way? What made you feel this way? And going forward. And I think that you and Sam did an excellent job doing that. I definitely remember that forum as clear as day, because it was like the first time where I think for me, like I came into law school and like I didn't fit in, and I still didn't fit in. Like my 3 years, I was like a sore thumb that stuck out there. But like I think being at that forum was the first time where I did feel like, okay, this felt like home. This felt like a space that I was used to. This felt like a space that, you know, not only were
Good.
there people like, you know, upset about, not only were people upset about the election, but people that want to move forward, right? People that want to create this change, people that are like, okay, this happened. What now? What are we going to do going forward? And like, you know, I'm happy to let you know that after you graduated, I can only speak for my year. A lot of us were radically charged. A lot of us took on like the key positions of all these clubs, and we really made the change that we wanted to see in our school during our time there, and of course beyond. So definitely, you inspired a whole bunch of leaders that came after you,
Oh,
and
you're gonna cry. You give me
you know, we
goosebumps. That's awesome.
yeah, and like you definitely like remember you telling me like I was like, oh, how can I remember like you and I had the discussion like at an event where I was just like, oh, I don't know sometimes how to say something. Like I don't want to come off as these like as this like smarty pants person or like someone that like is just being annoying, and you're like, well, you have a truth, just say it, because like if you're like you shouldn't be scared to say how you feel and the truth that you have to say. And I think like from there on out, I was like, yeah, like F it, I'm just gonna do what I
Oh,
have to do. And like I definitely took that into my own law school experience. So thank you so much for giving me that courage for being
oh
able
my
to like
God.
do that.
I
And of
remember
course,
that. I remember that conversation.
yeah,
I do.
yeah. It was like in the faculty lounge, and like you sat me down. You were like, okay, like you just gotta say what you have to say. Like don't be afraid. And of course, like that's the model that I took on in law school. Like I wasn't gonna change myself for anyone, whether it's me, my classmates, my colleagues, the professors, and of course like the legal industry. Like I'm just gonna like be like you and like law, and of course like your presence with like your colleagues definitely inspires me to be like, okay, I'm just gonna be myself, and that's the best thing that I can do. And like, whoever has something to say, you can have something to say. So like, I mean,
Oh, good. You're making
I got
me
a,
inspired.
and I was like, I mean, I guess like being myself worked out. I got like a student leadership award at graduation, which like I was confused about because I was literally
Yes.
on but I was on an e-board for only like a year. So like I don't even know why I got the award. I was just like, okay, I'll take it.
Doesn't
Sure,
matter.
thank you.
It's the
Like
impact
okay,
you made, not the
yeah.
amount of like e-boards you could be on in the time. It's the actual tangible impact that you made, which was huge.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think it's exactly like you said, like impact. It doesn't matter how long or how short. It's like, are you showing up as you? And I think like both
Yeah.
of us in our legal careers and like being in law students, like we've done that, of course, and everything. So like post, let me see what's. Oh my god. Okay, wow. We
We're
this
chit
is
chatting. What
we're already on like 48 minutes. Okay, okay. So let's move on.
just too easy to talk.
This is too easy. It always happens to me in like every interview that I do that I end up like rambling, and then I'm like, oh my god, look at the time. But so I would love to switch gears a little bit to talk about your experiences post grad. So you had a career as a public defender both in Essex County, Jersey, and of course Miami-Dade County in Florida. And I would just love to know, like, how was that like? And from your experiences, especially now that we're talking about police, I don't want to say police reform, but we're talking about the nature of policing in this country, the nature of crime and punishment in in this country, especially for Black and Brown folks. I would love to know, like, how can we move forward in bringing equity, like from your experiences as a public defender? How can we
Yeah.
move forward in bringing equity in the justice system, especially for Black and Brown folks in this country?
Oh man. That's a tough one. Because I wish I had this like magic bean, and this magic solution. Because as I'm sure a lot of people do, but I actually was kind of talking about this topic with Shelby a couple weeks ago. I think there's a lot of talk with people between the defund the police, abolish this, reform this, and I think there's a huge disconnect with people as to what everything means. Um, if I were to come up with an ideal solution for the criminal justice system, I personally feel like it's one of those things that needs to be completely torn down and rebuilt. And the reason I say that is because it's proven to be nearly impossible to change and reform something that was built for a totally different reason. It was built for slavery and oppression, and it's continued to be that under the mask of justice. And I feel that it's not working to try to change little parts of it because you have generations and generations and generations of people and practices and policies um, that perpetuate the old way of thinking. So I don't believe that we can move forward with just reforming and changing little aspects of the criminal justice system because it was built on this way of oppressing and enslaving Black people and people of color. And we have generations and generations of policies and behavior that just perpetuate the old way of thinking. So I feel, based on what I've observed as a public defender, that it would be best and most effective if we just started from scratch. Because if you're building something with a completely different idea in mind, the outcome is going to be different. That being said, and this is kind of what I was talking to Shelby Hoffman about a couple weeks ago, that being said, that's very idealistic and not necessarily realistic and not necessarily something that everybody's going to get on board with. So I understand that our real option is to reform it. So that would be like my ideal world. Scrap the whole thing, start over. Real world, yes, I think there just needs to be a reform because you see things from a different perspective when you're in it every single day. I mean, you mentioned it with government. You start to see things that you just did not know were there, and you see things that you wouldn't know were there unless you were in it every day. As a public defender, I mean, I look at it as the emergency room of criminal law. You have so many clients. You have 100 plus clients, and you have to triage everything. And especially down here in South Florida, you're dealing with so many immigration issues that are coupled with criminal issues, that are coupled with mental health issues, that are coupled with family law issues. It's like layer on layer on layer on layer, and you're not just representing your client. You're interacting with their family. You're interacting with their probation officers. You're interacting with maybe their immigration attorneys or immigration clinics. You're dealing with an interpreter if you don't speak the same language as them. So you have a lot going on. And then on top of all that, you have the state attorney and the prosecutor doing everything they absolutely can to keep people in jail. And down here, it's not like New York or I think New York is on it, but New Jersey with a non-monetary bond. Here it's monetary bond. And it's really, really hard because people will sit in jail for months and months and months just because they can't afford a $1,500 bond or even $150 to give to a bondsman to post their bond. And it's just not right. And sometimes these people have never been arrested before in their lives. So I say all that because in court every single day as a public defender and behind closed doors, talking with judges, talking with prosecutors, talking with probation officers, talking with corrections officers, taking police officers' depositions, you see things and you hear things that you did not know existed, and that you can't unsee or unhear. And for me, I knew a lot about criminal justice, but my eyes were opened even more because just like you said with government, I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on behind closed doors that people just get away with. And it's ingrained in just how things are done. Well, this is how it's always been done. And it's really hard to get people to change that behavior. Really hard to get people to change that behavior, especially because maybe sometimes people come into that profession because that's the kind of behavior they want. So, and I'm not saying that every single person's like that. I did deal with a lot of reasonable prosecutors and reasonable police officers. But on the flip side, I dealt with a lot of unreasonable prosecutors and a lot of police officers that would lie to my face in a deposition about something I 100% knew wasn't true because I had just watched their body camera before. Or they had a history of internal affairs investigations that I only knew about because I did the research and I subpoenaed things. But long story short, based on my experience as a public defender, I feel that in an ideal world, we got to tear the whole thing down and start over. But in the meantime, until that can happen, reform does need to happen. And I am in support of defunding the police to the extent that we are diverting some funds from them to agencies that can actually properly address crisis situations, social workers, mental health professionals, because officers are not trained enough to go out and handle somebody in crisis. Down in Florida, we have something called the Baker Act, and people with mental health issues will sometimes get Baker Acted. That's what you call it. Maybe a family member calls the 911 because somebody's having some sort of episode, some sort of like psychological episode. And instead of the person necessarily going to the hospital and getting the help they need, they get arrested, they go to jail, they get a criminal charge, they're in the mental health unit in the jail. Then the family's like, well, they were just freaking out. I didn't know what else to do. Like, how can we get them out? I'm like, well, now they caught a battery charge, or now they caught an aggravated battery against an officer because the cop was trying to arrest them and they were having some delusion and didn't know that they were swinging at a cop. So it's a lot of stuff that could be avoided if the correct people went to these situations in the beginning. We're criminalizing mental health. We're criminalizing drug addiction. We're criminalizing being poor. We're criminalizing a lot of things that don't need to be criminalized, and that's why we're kind of rolling this big snowball of stuff. So yeah, in the meantime, until we can just tear it all down like I want to do, I think slowly changing policies and diverting a lot of funds from the police departments to mental health departments to other agencies that can actually help these situations is what we need to do.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I definitely agree. Like, I think there has to be some type of way to like take the whole thing down, and of course divert back to communities, especially Black or Brown communities, right? Like, I can't speak to Florida. I'm not sure how the situation is there, but I know for New York City,
Not good.
it's not good. I was like, I think, I was like, oh, probably around the same.
It's terrible.
The housing crisis is a thing, and
it's
it's like we just need to invest back into Black and Brown communities. So before we wrap up, I'd like, you mentioned you went from public interest to now you're doing civil work in a private firm, and I'd love to hear about your motivation for that and like why like the shift.
Yeah. So if I'm being completely honest, I got burnt out at the public defender's office. I was the type of public defender that cared so much and took home a lot of baggage from my clients and their cases. And everybody who's a lifetime public defender will tell you that that's the absolute wrong thing to do because you'll burn out. And they're absolutely right. My problem is that I just couldn't help myself. And I think it's just because that's who I am. Some people are better at detaching. And I think that's a gift because you're able to stay in that work and keep helping because you can emotionally detach a little bit. You're still there because you care, but you can emotionally detach just enough so that you can do your job and not lose sleep at night. My husband's a lot better at detaching and drawing a line. I mean, he still will have some sleepless nights over his clients because you don't do the job unless you actually care. But he's a lot better at drawing the line than I was. I ended my time at the public defender's office in the juvenile unit, and that's initially what I wanted to do going in the public defender's office. I wanted to be a juvenile public defender. It was a wonderful experience because I got to work with these young kids and help them. So anybody under 18 could have been my client. My youngest client was 10 years old. But it is the straw that broke the camel's back for me because I cared even more for my juvenile clients. Not that I didn't care for my adult clients, but there was something about a child not having the means to get to court on their own because they're 12 and they obviously can't drive and mom or dad has to work. And the public transportation system down here is not good. They're missing school. They don't have enough food to eat. There's just a layer of things that a child can't do to be responsible for themselves that adults can. So man, yeah, that tore me up. I was able to help a lot of kids. I made some really good relationships and connections. I still check in on about probably 10 of my former clients on a regular basis just to make sure they're still doing okay and if they need anything or whatever it is. But that is exactly why I couldn't do it anymore, is because I would lose sleep and figure out, okay, I come home and thinking about these kids and how can I help them and what can I do? And, with an attorney-client relationship, there's also boundaries that you can't cross. And that's hard because sometimes you want to buy the kid a sandwich, but you can't because there are rules that stop you from receiving gifts, giving gifts, and things like that. So it was really hard. And I burnt out. And it wasn't easy being a household on 2 public defender salaries. We wanted to kind of buy a house, move forward, take steps in our life that would require having a little bit more money. So I kind of volunteered as tribute to be the one to step back and go into the civil world. You obviously get a pay raise, but I wanted to essentially still practice defense work because that's what intellectually stimulates me, make a little more money, but not have that emotional drain and attachment to my cases that I did, because I was losing so much steam that I was not able to help people the way I wanted to anymore. It's like that. It's like on the plane, like you have to put your oxygen mask on first. It's so true. And I wasn't doing that anymore, and it wasn't working for me. It was an incredible experience. The people at the public defender's office are wonderful people. I'm so glad that my husband's still there because they're still in my life. I miss them dearly. I miss the work dearly. But I don't miss tossing and turning at night, being worried about every single client of mine. Now I just toss and turn and I'm worried about my former clients. But I'm happier in civil in the sense that it's a move that I wanted to have in my life right now. It's different. And like I told you before, I've had to learn a whole new type of law. So that's been really hard. Billing is hard. I never knew how to bill, and that's been a learning curve for me. But I am still trying to find where I want to kind of land. I would love to teach at some point in my career. I'd love to be a law professor, and I'd love to do clinical work in some sort of civil rights realm. So that's something on the horizon. But for now, this transition was really more of a personal life comfort decision, and I needed a moment, but it's not the be all end all for me. And I think most people in this area would probably say the same. You need to kind of shift around over time to keep it interesting and to adjust to what's going on in your personal life. But yeah, my firm right now is very kind of up and coming, very technology forward. They're making a huge effort to support diversity and make sure that they're actually hiring diverse staff and attorneys and not just saying that. They donate to a lot of different scholarships for people of color. I'm impressed. It's still a law firm, so they have a lot of things to overcome, but I'm impressed with how different they are in comparison to other firms. And if I were to go to a firm, it would have had to be a firm like this. So, yeah, that's why I transitioned. It's not very sexy. It's not an exciting answer, but it's real. Everyone's, you kind of change like to what you need in your life. So, yeah.
No, and that's an admirable answer, and thank you so much for sharing that story. I think like it does hold a testament to who you are, and like you're someone that's caring, you're someone that wants to give back, you're someone that devotes your life for the better good of the world, and that's something that's like an admirable character about you. And of course, like that's you haven't changed from like who you were in law school. This has continued on till now.
Oh, thank
And thank you
you.
so much, Jess, for sharing your like story with me. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like me to promote for you? Projects, causes, and that you would like the audience to know? Like your Instagram
Um,
handle, I don't know, whatever.
Well, Sam and I have been working with Sally and Dean Crowell on doing kind of a series of webinars through the school
Mhm.
for people, and I think we kind of landed on it being a New York Law School community event, at least to start. But the first one that we're doing is going to be on July 30th. We don't have a title yet; we're still working on that. But we're going to talk about the recent social justice events, killings, traumas, everything that's been happening. We're also going to talk about any immigration things that have come up recently. Rosie Belliard's going to be there as well. And we're also going to talk about kind of ways to care for ourselves during this time with all of our advocacy. So that's going to be the first of the series. The current BALSA president and e-board is going to be involved at some point. I'm not sure if they're going to be involved in the first one or maybe the second one. Also, some of the e-board from Outlaws is going to be involved. So if you want to, once I have a poster and everything, I'll send it to you. But that's something that's coming up. We're working on helping people kind of have actionable steps to keep moving forward. So as the series come about, I'll let you know. The second one, I think, is going to be a Know Your Rights webinar. And then maybe we're going to touch on microaggressions that people experience in the workplace and how to handle those and all that stuff.
I'm super excited, and of course, I'll definitely promote those things. And of course, send me any promotional materials you want. You know, I'm down to promote for you. So thank you so much, Jess, for taking the time out. You have such a busy schedule, so thank you so much for spending this hour with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
I look forward to
May.
speaking with you, of course, and of course, like keep being you, keep being amazing. You're an inspiration to myself, and of course, I'm sure for many other New York law school students out there. So thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.